So I got invited to Sledgehammer Games Studio to try Modern Warfare 3 early, as well as get a ton of info that is coming with the brand new game. There was an insane amount of movement changes, what I think is probably the biggest thing that people were concerned about, along with other improvements that just get the game back to its kind of core elements that made Call of Duty so fluid, popular, and a lot of those things. But that's not all. We got to learn about campaign, zombies in the Modern Warfare universe, which is kind of unique. Tons of multiplayer info that is essentially going to make the game a lot of fun to play, at least in my opinion. And although we didn't talk about Warzone while we were there, it's easy to connect the dots and how the changes they're making to the game will improve Warzone as a whole. Before we get too deep, I want to give you a quick thank you for supporting the channel over the past year during one of the toughest years of Call of Duty. So thank you for sticking with the channel for those of you who have. And if you're brand new and looking to find your way back, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Thank you guys again for all the support. Starting off with the campaign, it continues off from the Modern Warfare 2 story. If you ended up playing the premium version of Modern Warfare 2, you played through that. It's just going to continue based off of that. Obviously, there's been a lot of teasers, trailers, stuff like that with Makarov. We've seen some old Verdansk POIs, specifically Stadium as well as Prison, which are going to be integral to the campaign missions and things like that, among other things. And they went out of their way to talk about how the systems in campaign are going to be slightly different to allow for a little bit more variety and replayability, because kind of how it sits now is generally you play it once and then maybe you try it again on a harder difficulty or realism or something along those lines. They've actually expanded upon the systems within campaign to make it more replayable. And one specific system is the open combat system, which allows you to essentially play it different each time. And we saw specific examples of this where somebody went like a little bit loud and then they end up getting shot at because maybe they didn't have the right weapon, they didn't have the right gear, or maybe they, use stealth to move around and get to the objective. And they said for a lot of these specific missions, you can actually 100% stealth them without ever letting the enemies know that you're there, or you can go all out. So you can really have a variety of ways to play certain missions and replay them in a different way. And on top of that, weapons that you loot, you'll be able to save and move on and try those in a later run. So like, let's say later on in a later mission, you get a specific weapon with a suppressor or whatever, you can go back to an older mission and maybe try the mission out with a different weapon type and kind of go from there, whether it's a knife or whatever. So you can actually have different playthroughs. I'm not a campaign guy or a lore guy. I think it's cool to play through once. I think that does add a little bit of a layer to it. Hopefully they give rewards the same way that they have for the past couple years, and we get a week early to play it before the multiplayer drops. We can kind of get a feel of it and not feel like I have to choose between multiplayer and the campaign. So as leads to zombies coming back in the Modern Warfare universe, which is pretty different, but it's going to be built by Treyarch. So it's going to have a lot of the Treyarch lore and systems that you're accustomed to, whether it's Juggernog and Speed Cola perks or stuff like that, or other systems with zombies and things like that. But it's kind of a huge shift because it's going to take place on an open world map, which the overhead view of the map, it kind of looked like whatever the next battle royale map's going to be. So it was pretty large in scale. There's going to be 24 players on the map, which they said was essentially 6 teams of 4, and it's all PvE. So even though you may interact with other players, it's going to be a little bit different than DMZ in a sense, because there's not going to be any PvP. So maybe there's opportunity to meet up and maybe do some harder content with the people in the lobby or activities. They didn't really specify too much or show any gameplay, so it's a little bit limited on that end. But essentially the gameplay loop is going to be where you load in, similar to Outbreak. You kind of loot up, you get your stuff together, you build up perks and you build up your guns. You can pack a punch, you can buy stuff from the store, you can earn the currency, which is usually called like essence, I believe, and that'll allow you to upgrade your stuff and get better over time. Where it's a little bit different than your standard Outbreak is that you can take the stuff that you get and you can actually exfil at some point in the match, and you can take that stuff with you for a future run. So at the start of the match, you already kind of have the progression you had from previous matches, which sounds similar to DMZ in a way. So it's kind of like a zombies extraction shooter PvE. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out. On paper, it sounds interesting. But it really just comes down to how they're going to scale the difficulty of the enemies and things like that. There'll still be mystery boxes, wall buys, all the stuff that you're really familiar with zombies, but the format will be you know, slightly different. There's still going to be Easter eggs. It sounds like there's economy, so you can actually take stuff out. If you get some schematics, you can build a Juggernog perk so that you can go in with it every single time, so that you get things that kind of persist and allow your character to develop over time, which will reward players that invest the time. The overall match time limit is 1 hour. So it looks like the zone will like close in and you've got to exfil before then. So very similar to DMZ in that aspect. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen with DMZ. They didn't mention anything about DMZ. And zombies seems to be separate, so I don't know if they're gonna like phase one out or whatever, but there are a lot of systems that sound very similar. So as right now, I'm making it up for me. I'm gonna call this DM Zombies until I see enough that it tells me it's gonna be drastically different and what it actually plays like when it comes launch time, because there'll be missions and contract, like pretty much DMZ, but with zombies and like some of the other systems different. So I'm not sure. It is interesting, and we'll have to find out if it's gonna be good or not. I have no clue if it is. And that's going to bring us to the main reason probably a lot of you are here, is to hear what are some of the differences and what multiplayer is going to offer, because obviously that's going to carry over in some aspects to how fun the game is going to be, and then also how those things will impact Warzone when we get the brand new map after the year 2 integration or whatever they want to call it. So some of the specific changes that were to how responsive the player feels when they're in control of the character, how fluid movement will feel, and then also the change to 150 health, which will allow it to have a little bit more normalized TTK across the different various weapon types, so they can balance those a little bit better. But before we dive into each one of what those means, the content is going to be pretty important. People are like wondering, what the heck are we going to play? It's going to launch with 20 maps at the start of the game. 16 of those are literally going to be the exact maps from Modern Warfare 2 in 2009. So this is going to include all the fan favorites, whether it's Afghan, Estate, Favela, High Rise, Invasion, Rust, Scrapyard, and even Terminal. So the original 16 maps from Modern Warfare 2 are essentially going to be carried over. They're obviously rebuilt from the ground up using the same measurement. So it's going to look much better than it did back in the day with the tiny FOV, because you're going to be able to zoom out a little bit, but it will be to scale of the original one. So that's going to be a lot of fun for people that did play it. You get that nostalgia, but like in the modern game, and then people that never got to experience what good maps were like, they'll have an opportunity to try those maps as well. On top of that, there's going to be 3 ground war style maps, which is the big battle maps with vehicles and stuff like that they've had for quite a while in multiple, iterations of the recent CODs. And then there's also going to be lastly a war game mode, specifically with one of its own maps. And this is a mode they brought back from World War II. I always enjoyed it, specifically for snipers, because you get a little bit more predictable lanes, but we'll see how it plays out. And although there's going to be other new modes that they're always experimenting with, this is going to be the first time you're going to be able to play hardpoint on these old maps. And hardcore will be there on day 1. That's one thing I specifically asked. I want to be sure of, because Modern Warfare 2 didn't launch with it. And then we got Tier 1, which is pretty garbage. And then eventually it came back with hardcore, because that's kind of what the players wanted. Guess what? That worked out better. So we'll see kind of how that plays out, but it's good to see that right off the bat, particularly when it comes to camo challenges. Those do make some like one-shot, one kills or headshots or certain bad weapons a little bit easier to grind. There will also be map voting, which obviously there's always certain maps that are going to be more popular, but this allows the players to give that feedback and specifically choose the maps they want to play while loading into the lobby. On top of that, the mini map is going to be back to normal. Traditional Call of Duty, where you fire an unsuppressed weapon, you pop up on the mini map. That little interaction will be back to normal. There's also going to be a silent movement perk option, even though the perk system's a little bit different. They have gear and stuff, which we'll get into. There will be an option to essentially make it so your footsteps are quiet, so that you can play like as if you have dead silence, which is something we've been asking for a while. Dead silence is a field upgrade, is still there, so that it's kind of, you get a little bit of overlap depending on how you want to play and what modes you're going to play. There's some new field upgrades, streaks, which they always do that stuff. We're not sure exactly how those will all interact. I think there was one where, like, if you're more of a solo player, it probably helps you run, you can throw it on the objective, and it will actually start capturing the objective for you. So if maybe you have teammates that don't want to jump on objectives, you can actually cover more ground. And we'll see how overpowered or underpowered this is, because you can definitely use this to bait an enemy into the objective, and then maybe you shoot them while they're trying to take out this field upgrade. But we'll see how that interacts with it, along with other streaks and stuff like that. But there's also a new system, thing they're called is aftermarket parts, and they said they're working on ones for their guns as well as the Modern Warfare 2 guns. And essentially how this would work is you can modify how a weapon functions. Kind of how the closest thing we have right now is like the X13. I think the Sidewinder blueprint, it has a specific barrel that allows it to turn essentially into an SMG, which is similar to what we're talking about, but I think it'll work a little bit different. And they've also decided to evolve the creative class. I think one of the best systems they ever had in Call of Duty is when BO2 introduced the Pick 10 system. And of course, that wouldn't really work in today's day and age because of the way the pros and cons work on attachments. So it looks like they've really gone out of their way to make a modified system in the spirit of Pick 10, but it still allows you to build the weapons you want. And essentially how this works is you have different pieces of gear that will, you know, count as your perk system. So that's boots, gloves, a vest, maybe even helmet or something like that. And then depending on what vest you choose, it might give you access to an additional gear slot where maybe you're able to hang gloves on your vest or wear specific armor or wear a specific headpiece or something like that, that gives you more utility to have an additional perk. But maybe the trade-off is now you can't run a tactical and lethal. Maybe use another vest that gives you ability to run 2 tacticals. Maybe you run another vest that allows you to run a double lethal and a tactical. So you kind of get that flavor of the Pick 10 without necessarily having the Pick 10. So I don't know what you would call it, because it's not like a Pick 10, because while all that's going on, you just equip your weapon and you get your 5 attachments, you can tune them. That's not going anywhere. So I think that gives kind of happy medium, so people don't have to sacrifice the viability of their gun to equip perks or have a lethal or tactical. So you kind of get the best of both worlds with still having to make some decisions on how you want to build your class out, because you might want this specific perk, but you also might want a tactical. So you kind of have to pick and choose. So there's trade-offs, which is always good in the creative class. Otherwise, people just dive into one option and that is it, because you don't have to give up anything in the current iteration of Modern Warfare 2. You get all your perks, you get all the lethal equipment and tacticals, you get bolt guns, you can go overkill, all 5. So it kind of allows at least some trade-offs, because then people can choose what they value most. And that all sounds good, but I haven't even gotten to the best part, which is all the movement and responsiveness changes. And I'm sure they're going to even improve some of this stuff beyond what they said, because there was so many changes, and it was almost like there was an audible gasp in the audience of creators that were watching, because it's like they pulled up the list and everyone was like, no, it's too good to be true. Like that's how crazy the changes sound, because it sounds like they've gone against this for so long in terms of the game development, with the exception maybe Treyarch is kind of stuck to giving the players kind of what they want in terms of gameplay loop. So pretty much when they got to the last slide, they said you're going to be able to cancel your slide animation. So how that'll work is very similar to Modern Warfare 2019, but it doesn't lead to essentially resetting your attack sprint. There's a little different mechanics there, I believe. And then there's cancel reload animations, which is, you know, a feature they added in Modern Warfare 2, which I don't think was all that popular. It's pretty bad to get stuck in a reload cancel animation. It allows players to mantle faster. And one thing that they've done with this is they've essentially removed the ledge hanging mechanic, so that instead of the game having to choose whether you're going to grab or mantle, you just mantle, and it's an even faster animation. On top of that, you can mantle while sprinting. You can shoot immediately while sliding, like instantaneously. As soon as you hit slide, you'll still be able to hip fire, which is a very cool mechanic. Not saying that it's gonna be a laser dot and you're gonna be accurate. On top of that, you can also aim down sight while sliding with a perk, or, you know, a piece of gear in this case. In addition to that, you increase tac sprint duration, which is just a buff to overall movement. In addition to increase tac speed recovery while sprinting. So how quick you can get your tac sprint back is also faster. And that's on top of increasing the strafe speed while in the hipfire and the ADS. So overall movement buffs there. And I know those are a lot of things that basically everyone's been asking for, at least a lot of people. And if you're not one of those people, it's okay. You've been saying it for 3 years, you can adapt. But when it comes to a new feature that they've added, it's called the tactical stance. And this is kind of like a weird halfway stance that allows you to not be fully aimed down sight and not in the hip fire. It's kind of halfway in between, almost kind of like what we had in Vanguard, where you can do like the blind fire but it's more like you're able to move around in that weird ADS animation, so that you'll be able to maybe utilize that to move faster. Like maybe if you're working a stairway, we have to actually play with that a little bit more to kind of figure out how viable or how broken that's going to be and how useful that's going to be, or if it's more of a gimmick. But I'm liking where all that other stuff is coming from and how that will impact the Warzone engine. Based off leaks, it sounds like those changes will make their way into it. But until I get official word, I'm not going to get too hyped on the Warzone side, but multiplayer is sounding great. And it's just weird to hear like these changes that are happening, especially when I've been recommending a lot of these changes for several months and even in sometimes years, in the case of the mini map and stuff like that. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section if you're more or less interested. If you made it to this point, hit the like button and subscribe if you're looking to find your way back. Thank you for watching as always. Have a great day.